In this video, we have a very special opportunity to compare two cars which at first glance look very similar, but they're actually very different. The 2021 base Panamera and the 2021 Panamera Turbo S. Now, the base car is $87,200 to start before options, while the Panamera Turbo S is $177,700 before options, which begs the question, is the Panamera Turbo S twice the car?
This video is made possible with help from Leland West, pleasure use insurance for Porsches, endorsed by PCA since 1992.
First and foremost, the 2021 Porsche Panamera Turbo S is not a cheap car. It starts at $177,700, and if it's loaded with options such as this one, $199,940, making it more than twice the cost of a base Panamera with no options. What you get with some of those options here are the sport exhaust, surround view cameras, which is very helpful when parking in tight places, an LED matrix design headlights, adaptive cruise control, sport seats plus, and a premium package which covers 4-zone climate control, ambient lighting, soft closed doors, and lane change assist. There are other options, but we're not going to delve too deeply into those. What a Panamera Turbo S gets standard is the air suspension with Porsche's active stability management system, which is long form for adaptive dampers. It gets the active anti-roll bars, which is the Pdk Sport or Porsche Dynamic Chassis Control, Porsche Torque Vectoring Plus, rear axle steering, and of course the PCCB or Porsche Carbon Ceramic Brakes, which are quite large at 420 millimeters up front, 410 at the rear, and the front calipers are actually 10 piston calipers, if you can imagine that. To bring the engine from 550 horsepower to 620 in its current form, there were changes made to the crankshaft, the connecting rods, the timing chain drive, torsional vibration dampers, new fuel injectors, and reduced compression ratio, so Porsche could crank up the boost and have this amazingly fast sedan that we're driving today. The front fascia is specific to the 911 Turbo as well, with bigger front air intakes and Turbo S specific lighting. And Porsche says that it has performance-focused handling, which we'll be able to compare to the Panamera base model pretty soon here. It's worth noting that all Panameras get extra standard equipment starting with the 2021 model year with no price increase, which includes comfort access, an updated communications display, lane keep assist, wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless phone charging, a sport steering wheel like the one found here, and a new front fascia, although we should differentiate that the front fascia on the Turbo S is, again, unique to this model. As soon as you get into the Panamera Turbo, it feels more special. It has the full leather interior, and a nice touch is the Alcantara, or I should say Race Tex, headliner and pillars. And there's just a refinement to the V8 that you don't get in the base model. From startup to when you're driving at part throttle, cruising around, or really attacking a road, it just feels like a more refined car. So let's pull away here and test out what that motor feels like. So slow speed steering with the Turbo S is quite nice. The wheel feels great in my hands. It's worth noting that the rear wheel steering also allows you to take tight U-turns if ever needed on a back road like what we were about to drive. And the first thing we're going to experience here is the engine, because that's probably what separates this from the base model most. It is tremendous, and the brakes are equally so. The PCCB brakes stop the car and never fade, even after several passes on a nice back road. And really, in the Turbo S, it's easy to get into a nice rhythm. Set in normal mode, suspension at its full soft. The wheel loads up nicely. One staff member who drove this car said that he felt the steering was a bit more numb than in the base car, which I'm not noticing as much here. And let's give it a little bit of throttle here. Second gear. Third gear and back down. What I've discovered is that while the power is fun to play with and it's usable, on a tight back road like this, it really is a bit too much and you could get into trouble quite easily. Turn it into sport mode and the suspension firms up noticeably. In fact, I wouldn't recommend attacking a back road like this in normal mode because the shifts are a little bit too slow for comfort. And I do appreciate the extra body control that the active dampers supply when it's in sport mode. As you can hear there, the exhaust note sounds great. 4,000 RPM. Drop it down to third. It's just really a nice engine. And it really suits the car. For such a large, heavy car, it masks its weight well. The PASM dampers give you the control you need without taking in some of the sharp bumps too harshly. And the active anti-roll bars actually play a part here and keep the car very flat. Though we'll get into what that means when we drive the base car a little bit later here. The 8-speed Pdk transmission pulls off shifts flawlessly, going from fourth to third, third to second, and even if we wanted to, we could go to first gear right there and there's barely any movement. Put it into Sport Plus and it drops a couple gears, firms up the suspension even more, and it also allows you to play with the car with more slip angles on a road like this. Though, at my skill level, I will not be attempting that. 620 horsepower just gives you too much to go wrong. The Sport exhaust system is a nice touch, which is optional on the Panamera. Just turned it on and you can hear that growl, the low rumble. Just a really easy car to drive, considering its power, its size, and its weight. Put it into manual mode. Kick it down to second gear, you can really get on it. Really, third gear is all you need for a road like this because of all the torque that comes down low and stays with you through the rev range. And power peaking at 6,400 RPM. So the way the Panamera Turbo S drives, it does feel like a more expensive car than the base Panamera. The question is, however, is that with rear-wheel drive and less power, can a base Panamera offer quite as much driving enjoyment as the Panamera Turbo S? We're now in the standard Panamera, which is Porsche's only rear-wheel drive Panamera available. You step it up to the Panamera 4, 4S, Panamera GTS, they all have all-wheel drive. So immediately there's something unique about this car in the fact that it loses a bit of weight at the front axle and has rear-wheel drive. Standard Panameras cost $87,200 without any options. This one has quite a few and is out the door at $105,470. Some of those options are standard interior with black and Luxor beige. It doesn't feel quite as nice as in the Panamera Turbo S. It looks like leather, but I'm not quite sure it is. The steering wheel is leather, just like in the Panamera Turbo S. And the pillars and headliner are the standard cloth instead of the nicer looking Alcantara or Racetex. Rear axle steering comes as an option in this particular car, which should improve handling. It'll allow you to corner tighter at slow speeds and improve stability at high speeds. It has surround view, which is a nifty feature that uses the cameras around the car to help you avoid obstacles in tight areas like parking spaces or garages. It has Sport Chrono, which adds different drive modes selections, which are accessible with this dial on the wheel or through the screen here using the car menu. It has Premium Package, which includes 4-zone climate control. More importantly, it has the air suspension as part of the Premium Package with the PASM active dampers, which surely help handling and also allow the car to cruise at a comfortable suspension setting and tighten up when you're approaching your favorite twisty road. It has lane change assist, soft closed doors, and also ambient lighting plus as part of the premium pack. So what the standard Panamera gets you is a 2.9 liter V6. In this case, it makes 325 horsepower and 331 pound-feet of torque. With the 2021 model, for the standard Panamera, they replaced a 3-liter single turbo unit that came in the car beforehand and had similar horsepower. 0 to 60 will go in 5.3 seconds, or with Sport Chrono, if you option that, which this car has, it will do that in 5.1 seconds. And you will go on to a 168 mile per hour top speed, which I think we can all agree is plenty for a car like this. The brakes are the standard iron disc brakes. They're quite a bit smaller than the carbon ceramics on the Turbo S. Porsche describes the handling tuning of this car as sharp and composed, as opposed to performance focused in the Turbo S. So I guess we'll see pretty soon here what that means. So as in the Panamera Turbo S, the steering is nice and light as you are at parking lot speeds, which is nice. It's what you want. And right now we're in normal mode, which means that the throttle mapping is at its softest, and so is the transmission shifting settings. So here we go. First off, how's that 2.9 liter? Well, I can say it's a lot slower than the Turbo S, and the noises it makes aren't really all that great. It's a pretty nondescript engine as far as noise is concerned. However, it gets you going pretty quickly enough, and the power band is nice and fat, meaning that you won't have to shift too much if you don't want to. Something I immediately notice coming around some of these turns is that without the PDCC system, which is Porsche Dynamic Chassis Control, or the active anti-roll bars that the Turbo S has, the car does lean a bit more in the corners, but I'm not sure that's such a bad thing for a lower horsepower car and for driving enjoyment. You know, a little lean in the corners allows you to feel them out a little bit better and get into a nice rhythm. So turn it up to sport mode and the car firms up a little bit. Throttle mapping becomes a little sharper. It doesn't always pick the right gear when you want it, but it does a pretty good job in sport mode. What I'm liking about the car now is it feels very fluid over these corners with a little bit of that roll, courtesy of the normal anti-roll bars. So now I have the car in Sport Plus and I've put it into manual mode, and the transmission is shifting exactly how I like it right now. On an earlier drive, I did notice that in a car with much less horsepower than the Panamera Turbo, that the gearing is a little bit short with 50 miles per hour coming at the top of second gear. And when you shift to third, you just don't quite have that wave of torque to push you along like you do in the Turbo S. So that is one downside of having the smaller engine, but I think on a road that isn't quite this tight as this one is, that you wouldn't really be having any problems with gear ratios. What I am noticing is that the car is more playful being rear-wheel drive. In some of these corners here, I'm able to get the rear end to come and play a little bit of a slip angle, which in the turbo, even with its prodigious horsepower, either wouldn't happen despite the throttle inputs that I was giving it, or I was just a little bit too afraid to approach its limits on a public road, whereas in this Panamera, it just seems much more approachable. So what I'm gathering from this drive is, while driving enjoyment was great in the Turbo S, the standard Panamera actually seems like more of a driver's car. A car where you can savor each gear a bit longer thanks to fewer horsepower, and a car that allows you to adjust its line on or off the throttle just a little bit more. And coming up to this corner here, you can get a little bit of play into the rear end, which is something you just can't do with the Panamera Turbo S. Now again, I said that the engine isn't the greatest sounding Porsche engine a bit earlier, but by no means does it not sound good. It just doesn't have that burble of the V8 or its scream at higher RPMs. It feels like it's totally willing to rev, and you know, when it comes down to it, I don't see why you would want any more car than this, unless you really want the bragging rights of having the fastest, the best, which the Turbo S is. On your commute, on normal roads, when you're not attacking your favorite back road, the standard Panamera feels more like a standard car. It does have that specialness to it that all Porsches have, but the engine isn't going to wow you every time you hit the throttle. The sense of speed just isn't quite there. So to answer the question I posed earlier, is the Panamera Turbo S twice the car as the standard car? The answer is no. What it boils down to is, if you have the money and you're looking at a Panamera, buy the Turbo S if you can. It's objectively the better car, and it feels more special all of the time. If you either want that unique rear-wheel drive feeling that the standard Panamera gives you, or if you don't have the money to step up to a Turbo S or even a GTS or Panamera 4S, the standard car is a great choice.